Recordings in progress, so I can start again. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Prep Skills in Module 8. We're going to be looking at doing assessment strategies and brain-based learning. So you all have come across assessment so far, so we'll talk about that first. Why is my mouse not working? Oh, there we go. Okay, the acknowledgement of country. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we live, work and learn. We've got students today from many parts of Australia. We pay our respects to First Nations people and their elders past, present and emerging, according to great respect for their knowledge and wisdom. And this lecture is coming from Townsville, and we have two groups here, Wulguru Kabar peoples and Bindal peoples. And for those of you who don't know, Townsville has a river running through it, probably like most Australian places. And so Wulguru Kabar is across the river, and I'm on Bindal land, where the campus is on the other side of the river. Okay, today we're going to talk about the nature of assessment and have some tips around that. The workings of the brain, which is an interesting part, and then we've merged that into memory and thinking about how, as students, we can improve our memory capacity, which is always a good thing because we often forget things. So let's look at the nature of assessment in the first part. Okay, you might associate yourselves with some of these emotions of when your assessment is due, but it can be an opportunity to think, oh, I can show myself how much I have learnt. I can show other people how much I have learnt. However, sometimes we're not always in this position because we haven't planned it well and we're sort of in a state of despair and anxiety. Wonder what you might like to put this in chat. What would it be like if there was no assessment, or if there were no assessment? Whether that should be a were or a was. What would it be like if there was no assessment? I think it should be was, because we're only talking about one assessment. If we're talking about two, we'd have were. Were. Anyway, we're not here for English.
So we've got quite a few answers popping in the chat here, Lois. So life would be stress-free, says Ella. Mark says there'd be no challenge. A few more stress-free comments. No growth, a happy place, less accountability to complete all reading. And that's important, that accountability notion, isn't it?
It is.
There'd be no sense of urgency to learn the content. Robin says, in capital letters, you could get away with not really doing the work required to learn and memorize.
Yes.
Brock says there'd be no awareness of the gaps in your own knowledge. And Kyle says no way to measure your growth. So we've got a balance of people saying it's important, and then other people admitting that it would be stress-free. And Robin apologises for the capitals. No worries. No worries at all.
It's just being emphatic. Okay, so understanding assessment. So just leading on from that, we want to look at what the purpose of assessment is. And one of those things is to practice particular skills and demonstrate proficiency. So as a nurse, you will learn how to take blood pressure recordings. As a paramedic, you learn to intubate people. Those skills are, they need to be assessed so that the university knows that you're going to be safely out there in the big wide public and can perform those skills. And that goes right across any profession that you're going to enter. Provide students with timely feedback and enhance learning. I spend, and all of us as lecturers spend time giving feedback to students so that you can see what you have, see how you're going in regards to our expectations and what university expectations are. And so you can act on feedback, and then that can often enhance your learning. And it means that, you know, for many of you may have submitted a draft for Learning Portfolio A, and many times students know exactly what to do for Learning Portfolio B, and they can maintain their marks or improve their marks, whatever the case might be for that particular student. You provide assurance and encouragement for students. We need that as students, no matter what we're studying or how old we are. We need feedback, and we start that out as young people, and we need feedback. Some students, last term, a student said to me, you know, when you get older, you don't get the feedback and the encouragement that you have as a child, but you actually still need it. So I thought that was interesting. And provide feedback to the lecturer. We as lecturers, and all lecturers, need to know that the class is understanding, and if they're not, we can adapt that learning in many cases. So there's two types of assessment. One is formative, and it's feedback that doesn't count to the final grade. Summative, opposite, and you think of the word form and you think of the word sum. Summative, task that directly counts towards the final grade. And many people will often give examples of that as in maths, that if you're doing maths, you're doing your weekly modules to get feedback, that they are formative, and summative is which is your final ATA or ATB, which is kind of like your big tests. Now, types of assessment will vary according to discipline, but we have exams, essays, reports, projects, oral presentations, on-site placements, and the list goes on. We've had quite a few discussions since AI has come to the fore, and I think we are probably going to see more oral presentations in the future. So just think about that, and perhaps less on the written in the essay format. But at the moment, a lot of degree courses, undergraduate, are based in essays. And you can see your study guide for further examples. So tips, be prepared, and this will go for your presentation, oral presentation that you are going to be presenting over the next few weeks. Be clear about your tasks, really hard to get a good mark if you're not. Read assessment details carefully. And, you know, they say all the information is in the detail, including instructions on exams, quizzes. Oops. Take advantage of the resources provided for you. So you have Moodle, you have your readings, you have your study guide, you'll have textbooks when you're an undergraduate, you've got people, you've got your friends, your peers in class, you've got your lecturers, you have a whole range of tips or resources that are available to you. Study examples of past exam papers. You can go onto the student handbook and click onto those. You just need to put your student number in. Sorry, not your student number, your unit code, and then you'll see past exams. They're not always available for every discipline or every unit, but they often are. And form study groups. It's the good thing about study groups is that you might have a lecture, you might have a tutorial, and then you don't see us for another week perhaps. And study groups, you've always got that study group there. You can send a message to them. And so you can, and the power of more people is often really better than just you working on your own. Okay, so when you get you do assessments, you get feedback. And so you're learning to accept constructive feedback. which is really not criticism. It's really just that it is giving you constructive feedback. Now, if you're feeling upset about a mark that you received and you thought you did a lot of work for it and you think, oh, I should have got more, sometimes it's actually quite good just to leave it there and just, I'll come back to that when I'm calmer. And you look at those details there. Time management, we've learned, we did stress and resilience, that time management equals stress management. So we can carry that forth into our assessments. It's our daily practice. You know, as students, if you think of this as a job, and if you are studying 3 or 4 units, it is a job. It is a full-time job. And so if we can manage our time, then we manage our stress. If we can manage our stress, we can manage the assignment. So it is, one has a compounding effect on the other. At the same time, we don't want assessment to take it over. I can remember when my children are in their 30s now, and when they were about 7 and 10, I started study again, and my husband said to me, you've got to get this assignment out of the house. It's got to go. And so I did send it eventually, and then I left the house and the children with him. So I thought, well, yes, he's right. So we want a balance, don't we? Because when we let something like an assessment take over, we become very one-tracked in our thinking, and then we don't do our best. Okay, let's look at part 2. Any comments on assessment that we need to deal with, Virginia?
So one student said that they've been putting off getting their feedback or looking at because I popped into the chat a question saying thumbs up if you've looked at the feedback on your LPA. I'm not sure that everyone saw it because we've had 6 thumbs only. But one student answered very honestly saying that they're putting off looking at the feedback because they're nervous about what they might read, even though the student thinks it's silly. So I've just responded and said, have a look, because there might be a message from your support lecturer about to get in contact with them about something. But there will be good advice about how to approach Learning Portfolio B. So maybe get someone to sit with you while you're looking at that feedback, or even just when you're downloading it, Canon.
I work in the Academic Learning Centre as well, which supports students during the degree, and you're entitled to have support from the Academic Learning Centre for your first 8 units. And when I was working with one unit, it was a nursing unit, only 1/3 of the students opened their feedback and 2/3 didn't. They were just interested in, well, I shouldn't say they were just interested in their mark, but their mark was, they knew that they had passed, and then they moved on and they didn't. And lecturers spend a lot of time, and I know degree lecturers spend a lot of time giving feedback because they want you to do your best. So try and do that. And as Virginia said, there might be a message in it to make contact your lecturer, or the feedback might just give you some clues about how to cope with the next one. All right, workings of the brain. So there's a lot of information, obviously, about the brain out there. We're going to just look at 6 facts about your amazing brain, which is on Moodle as a resource, and it's also in your study guide. And it also comes up, funny enough, in assessment in Learning Portfolio B. So take note. And I meant to say at the beginning, if you can take notes on today's lecture, it will be good to help you remember things, because one of the things about assessment is that if you want to go back and look at it, your material that you've learned, you've got to make it attractive. I've had times when I've gone back and, you find blank pages, or you find scribbling, or you find not enough information. You want to go back, and if you like colour and you like diagrams, then make it interesting for yourself to go back to. So we've got connections are important. This is fact 1. We have more than 100 billion brain cells, an amazing capacity to gather and transmit cells. So that means that if you imagine that there's 10 pieces of string, because there's a capacity to gather and transmit signals, because that's how our brain works, and then that how it controls our body, like, for example, movement. That's how we learn, that's how we walk. And that's why babies don't walk, because those synapses and those parts of the brain have not developed or are developing. So you can imagine 10 pieces of string, and then they go out to another 10 people. Then we have 100, and then it goes on, and then they held out pieces of string, and they meet another 100, make 100 connections. This is what's going on in our brain all the time. And so a second factor is in the pathways in the brain are not fixed. Now, in the past, we've often said that the damage is done and nothing can change it. But your brain's always changing, and if we don't use it, we tend to lose it. And so we can then make these new connections. And a lot of the research that looks into that, when people have had brain damage, they have been able to create new connections and new pathways for information. And so it's a matter of using it. I had a student last term, and she shared this information with us, is that she had some damage to parts of her brain, and she had to relearn to speak, relearn, a lot of things. And she was doing steps, and she was doing 2 units a term and is doing really well. And so she hasn't a lot of, she's had to learn new information as well. So some of her memory has been disturbed. So that's fact 2. So after fact 2 comes fact 3. We haven't finished with 2. So our brains are plastic, and comes up in Learning Portfolio B as a question. Talk about the plasticity of the brain. We can learn new things and change our ways of thinking. Can we break bad habits? Yes, we can. Takes discipline and practice, and there's varying information out there about how long it can take, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I guess it depends on the activity. Life events have impacts, and developing mindfulness can help. So there is research out there that if we practice mindfulness and practicing being in the moment, it can help us undo our negative patterns of thinking. And there is a link on Moodle about mindfulness and how it changes neuroscience. I work with Larry Webster, and he works in the maths discipline, and he's studying neuroscience. So we often have conversations about pathways and how to, about learning and everything. And one of the things that he has often says, and I say it in all my classes too, is that we need to write things down, because there's a connection between our brain and our hand, and hence our memory. All right, there's a mind-body connection. My mother used to say this all the time: healthy mind, healthy body. And I actually think she was quite right. And I used to think, oh, I've heard that so many times before. But it is. What's good for our body is good for our mind. What's good for our mind is good for our body. We have some common things for both of those, like rest. We physically need rest, but our mind needs rest. And whether we're introverted or extroverted, we've talked about as being introverts, that we need to have our alone time, but extroverts do to some extent as well. So what happens in the body affects the brain, and the other way around. And physical and mental health are vital to effective learning. So this is another neuroscience thing that Larry and I have talked about often, is that when we're anxious and our mental health is not, where our well-being is not in a stable state, if you like, we don't learn well. we don't pay attention. That's our reasoning for not, that's our reason for not performing well or remembering things. And physically, we have to be well. If we're in pain, then it affects our mind and then it affects our learning. So the three of them are very tied up. So the switch on for brains, surprisingly enough, are exercise, nutrition, adequate water, natural lighting and fresh air. When I worked at one university when I first came to Australia, I was inside a cupboard and it was so depressing. And in the end, I asked to be moved because I was dreading coming to work. Relaxation and meditation, outside time with nature. Now they're good for our bodies too, aren't they? And ample REM sleep. REM sleep is our deep sleep, and it's where we process much of the information. And there's research out there that says about memory and exams is that if we have a good sleep before we have an exam in the morning, then we will remember better because it consolidates that memory. So cramming all through the night doesn't work as well as having ample REM sleep. The switch off for the brains is this sort of similar to what was done in stress and resilience, is poor diet, lack of sleep, high stress, drugs and alcohol, lack of exercise. So, and we've all been in this, you know, we all can get into this state and various forms of it, and we don't function as well as we could. Then we have a mind-body connection that we talk about, and music can be that connection. And so a lot of you in the audience today will possibly be quite familiar with this. And there might be some out there that have other kind of music that, and you find it helps you concentrate, but might be a little bit opposite to this. So the Mozart effect, it puts one into a state of deep relaxation known as the alpha state. But surprisingly, we can actually learn in that relaxed state because we are, I guess, cutting out that external stimuli that's going on. Baroque music, Vivaldi and Bach and Handel and Mozart, that are all good and all helpful. All right, so that was fact 3. Now we're moving on to fact 4. Is there anything in the chat about music or anything, Virginia?
Very quiet in the chat, Lois. They're all riveted, obviously.
Oh, good. Riveting's good. Okay, fact number 4. We're searching for meaning that occurs through pattern. And sometimes many of us say that you've got to have context for learning. It's got to fit into something. And we've got to have some glue from new information onto old. And then we make meaning by categorizing information as well. So we put it into categories. So that enables us to be able to walk into a room and recognize that it's a lecture theatre. And a lecture theatre has certain functions. It has a video screen and it has chairs or desks, and very depending upon what room you're in. Yeah, so we can do that. So we think, right, this is another lecture, and then this can follow on. So pattern is really important. Just going back to patterns, I worked with a English language teacher, and she believed that people that learnt language easily were usually pretty good at maths too, and it's all about patterns. So one of the things that when I was access coordinator and interviewed students, I used to say to students, and then I would explain prep skills and explain essay writing. And I said, then you have to do maths. I said, you'll find maths quite straightforward. It's all about patterns. And so Larry says to me often, well, Lois says it's all about patterns. So today we're learning this pattern. And that is why your maths teachers, and if you're not doing maths, you will do maths probably, is that if you, when you're doing it, they encourage you to repeat and repeat and repeat so that you are seeing what that pattern is. And then that pattern becomes automatic. And so you can, just know quite quickly that 9 plus 2 equals 11 and 10 plus 1 equals 11 and so forth.
Can
That's
I talk about another
far as my
patterning thing,
maths go.
Lois?
Yes, sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
So I read somewhere that most Nobel Prize winners in science also play a musical instrument. So there's another kind of patterning that happens with the knowledge of how music works that also helps this patterning, but also makes your neurons fire in different ways. So that was an interesting fact as well.
It is, yeah.
There was a comment about music while I'm talking about music. So Catherine said that she likes to listen to classical music, particularly 1800s styles, and she swears that it makes time pass quickly. So it sounds like it helps her get right into the zone.
Yes,
thanks,
good.
Catherine.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. We've done 4. Okay, emotions are critical to patterning. So we learn best by pattern. We learn well with a pattern, but it's also that learning is driven as much by emotion as there is logic. So a pattern is a logical. You're seeing a pattern in maths, or you're seeing a pattern in language, but it's driven just as much by your emotions as it is by that logical process. So learning is enhanced by challenge. When we're in challenge, we think, oh yeah, because often I see math students say, oh, I've never thought about doing it that way. It's so much easier. And or I sometimes hear comments also that say, oh, I hate it when you're shown another way because I was always taught that way. And so it's just suggesting that there is another way. However, our learning is inhibited by threat. We don't learn well when we are stressed. And then that's why we say that if something's happening around exam time or test time, you can get a medical certificate, something quite big. I remember a student a while ago, his mother was really unwell and went off to hospital, and he went and sorted her out, and then he went and sat a maths exam. And we said to him, or maths test, we said, you don't have to do this. He said, no, I want to do it. And he didn't do very well. And so he was able to sit it again because with some evidence, because he wasn't in a good state. He couldn't concentrate. And that's what it's about, priorities too. If there's something really big going on in your life, that's where you'll go. That's where you'll want to be. We've got a child that's sick. That's where you want to be, not doing a maths test. Okay, this is a fact is about the left and right hemispheres, and is it a fact or a myth that we have this sort of straight down the line? Left on one side is our logic, and then the right side is our creativity. It's probably oversimplified, and so we'll see. The right brain preference is that we use our imagination and we're creative and we draw diagrams and you use graphics. You see the big picture and you personalize information. And this is where your shape and color might come from. The left brain is logical and evident, and you need evidence. Turn information into lists. You use headings, number items, turn things into concepts and ideas into flow charts. The fact is really, it's probably more symbolic, but we do need that crossover. And does anybody know what the structure between this here is? What the name of it is? In between the two hemispheres?
Is it the equator?
Well, so yeah. Sort of. Yeah, it's called, and it's a Latin term. It's called the corpus callosum, and I think from memory that sometimes it's removed because of epilepsy, and things like that. And then we don't often pay. Those people will have to learn to. They'll have to create new connections to learn that crossover. So that's something that you could explore in some of your readings. But we need both because both it's uniquely organized. So it's more symbolic, the left and the right brain. Okay, now we want
So
to...
before you go on, sorry, I do
Yeah.
have to say 2 things during the chat. So Kane has clearly pointed out that it's myth. But that's more about how popular science has used those concepts, isn't it?
Yes.
There is still scientific evidence to show that the hemispheres govern different activities in the body in general terms. And I'm not going to say what Kyle wrote, but just a description of how the hemispheres are separated.
Rightio. Yeah, I was thinking about that because I was a nurse and used to, when looking after stroke patients, if they had the stroke in a certain aspect of their brain, then their speech would be affected. And so, you know, that is, like you say, that consolidates that idea. There are definite parts of the brain that have responsibility, if you like. All right, so part 3 is practical strategies to help with memory and learning. I'm just going to make sure my watch is on. All right, so how's your memory? I'm going to give you 1 minute to look at this image without writing down, and then try and see after that 1 minute how many words you can remember. One minute seems like a long time when you don't say anything, Virginia. Just a few more seconds. Okay, how many words can you remember? Write them down. Okay, who could remember more than 10?
We've got a lot of people writing their remembered lists into the chat.
Good.
At the moment, I think, not trying to judge people on, you know, who's got the most or anything, but Lucy's list seems to be the longest. Lucy got 15. Canna's got quite a list there with a few question marks, as well as she's questioned some of her entries, but she said she got distracted by the dog gif. We've got most people just under 10.
Okay. Yep, someone's with 12. And so we're going to have a look at Lucy's one, and she has got log, cog, dog, blue, green, pink, India, holiday, Gandhi, windy, sick, jam, saucer, milk, butter, and Fred. And the Lily has got dog, saxophone, cog, tutor, India, student, pink, circus, doctor, Gandhi, holiday, and green. So what strategies are people using?
I tried to use like the first letters of the words And then
Okay. Yep.
once I did that, went to pictures to try and see if I could remember the word associated with the picture. And then after that, it was just a free for all.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good range
Amanda,
of strategies.
isn't it? Yes. Amanda said she used words that rhymed. Robin's strategy was to hope for the best. Lucy said that she put colours together, then seemed to construct a story around holiday in India. So she used a fantasy sort of story to link some of those words. Balili did the same thing. She tried to make a story with them in her head so she could picture it visually. So we've got some visual learning strategies coming in here, or remembering strategies. Carla went for words that sounded similar. So maybe you're thinking homophones or rhyming. And the ones that were formatted differently stood out to her more. So there was some that the colour was indicated. There were some with circles around them and so on. This is an interesting one. Ella said, I read one word, then read it again with a second word. Then I read the first and second word and added a word and continued to do this. So this is more like a rote learning kind of method, like the ones that where we learned our timetables, where we just repeated things over and over. Molly said, I remembered the 5 words with OG in it. Yep. So you're looking for a language pattern. Kyle matched colour images, tried to make a Ginley, I'm not sure of the spelling there, song to make a story. Rory said he used stories. Rory's the story guy. Exotic sandwich at the circus with Fred. Nice. Candace said her eyes went straight to the coloured blocks and into the pictures, and then it was a free-for-all. And Catherine said, like the elements table, I sing a song to remember. Oh, Kyle, you meant jingle. Okay, so Kyle made a jingle out of it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes that making jingles and making things ridiculous is or funny is sometimes the way we remember. Yeah, and it's interesting. I remember doing a professional development thing class a long time ago, and this guy taught us to juggle first of all, and to get our brains moving. And then we had to do all the prime ministers of New Zealand from 1800, well, whenever New Zealand, not 1800, from the 1850s onwards to present day. And that was that kind of branches, and then you moved on to looking at one prime minister who there was a statue of in the capital city, and then you moved up or down according to where he was in the timeline. So what strategies did you use? Repetition, like the log and the cog. Categories of words, rhyming words and meaning. So one meaning has another. This time I did it. I did it differently than what I'd done it last times. And I said Lennon had a dog who had a pink poo, and it was Pongi, and he had to go to India. So to meet Gandhi. And then I ran out of ideas because I sort of got a bit silly, and so nothing, and then I was lost after that. So it does need to have some meaning. Visual clues, pictures, words that look the same. Story making, logical or nonsense. All right, so we have this various way, and so those ways of our memory and creating memories is that we can put things together, and then we'll know more facts. Encoding. Okay, these are the stages of memory. So we have these 3 stages. It's got to go into our memory in the first place. We have to be able to store it, and then we have to be able to retrieve it. So we take in information from the 5 senses when we encode. So we might smell something, and we have associations, of course, with smells, pleasant and unpleasant. We hear something, etc. Storage. Now, our storage is, we've heard these terms, short-term and long-term memory. And retrieval. We can only retrieve a certain amount. If we had to retrieve everything that's in our memories, we wouldn't get anything done because there's so much in there. So we can encode in different ways and we can use different senses. So for example, a writing to-do list is a type of way of encoding. And Joshua Foa, you'll find on Moodle, we remember when we pay attention. And well, that's why we've talked about and encouraged you to note take, not note take to the point that your hand's dropping off, but just to note take to the extent that you've got some ideas there that are going to jog your memory, and also that brain to the hand exercise is actually enhancing memory too. So that is worth a look. Okay, strategies that work is that we look at it, we write it, we number it, we give it shape and color, we turn it into a diagram. So what we're doing is actually we're making this, whatever we have to remember, less passive, and we're trying to make it, we're getting involved in it. We sing it, turn it into a diagram, sing it, draw it, use gestures, make it bizarre, and say it aloud. Teach someone, use a funny accent. So you can do all kinds of things to remember it. You can put things, put concepts, ideas, if you're learning a subject like biology, into, you can record it. You can tell somebody it, do all sorts of amazing things. So a dog trying to ride a bicycle. And so he's giving that meaning something. Okay, so the brain though does thrive on information and probably doesn't do very well with disorganization. And so often, you hear people say, I feel so disorganized in your brain. It's almost a physical thing. It feels like it's here, there, and everywhere. So every good boy deserves fruit is a way of remembering mnemonics, is a way of remembering music and remembering the colors of the rainbow. Roy, give, biv. You have to find something that makes sense to you. If you're going to use long and fancy things, sometimes you won't remember what that was. That would help you to remember what you need to remember. So, excuse me, that, it can be helpful. We were talking about strokes before, and we have, if people are wanting to become a speech therapist, they have to learn all the muscles and the bones in the face. And so that is a way that you can remember those. And Virgil cannot make my pet zebra laugh. I used to have one as a child, how to spell arithmetic. And that was a funny one. And it's probably not culturally correct to say so now what it was, but it was something about somebody being inside a church. So he could eat toffee in church, something like that. So I always spell arithmetic, which is actually quite a hard word to spell. And so there's one ways of learning the 8 facial bones. We have visual mapping tools, the whole brain thinking, the big picture. So that's going back to our learning styles that this may work. But it doesn't really matter whether you are a big picture person or a small picture person. Small will, very in sequence. People that are thinking in sequencing need to see the big picture, and people that are big picture people need to see the little part too, the smaller parts that make up the big picture. So we're not absolutely, one way or the other. Helps to generate ideas, and it shows how ideas connect. And we've learned already that connections are really important. And shows lots of information in an economical way. So you can put the information into a visual map like this, as opposed to putting it in a page, which will take 2 pages of an A4 size. This will take half an A4 size. Sometimes it gets too busy for us though, but we can cluster our brainstorming. So where we talk about, and these are helpful words, and they're really helpful in essay writing for those who are doing essay writing. So if you ask yourself the how, the when, and the where, and the why, and the who, and the what questions, you will actually meet a criteria in the paragraph. You don't have to write every single one, but sometimes to give an explanation, you want to know who's affected, where they're affected, who's the most affected, how do they become affected by watching too much screen time, and how did it, what is too much screen time and why, etc. And then, of course, you got all these little branches off that. And I can remember my master's lecture supervisor saying to me, you've got to ask yourself the so what question. Write down information, you put it in a paragraph. I want you to tell me so what. In other words, I want you to go that much further. Took me a little bit of time to go that much further, but that was a helpful thing for me. And then we have concept mapping, just similar kind of things, but it's sort of organized in a different way. So increased knowledge and diffusion of knowledge. So in other words, try and relate this, and relating things to you as a student will be really helpful, because that's what happens when you go into your degree. You're going to talk about what are your responsibilities as a student nurse, what are your responsibilities as a paramedic student, etc. What are your responsibilities as a teacher, who's a person that is doing early childhood teaching, for example. So there's different ways that we can get out our message there. We can interact with people, we can provide a service, we can use storytelling, we can value different things, we can value different employees. We have learning, and then we have the delivery of that knowledge. So there's all things, and then they're deeper. I actually probably like this more so than that, because to me, that works for me better. But it only works for me probably because it's a mixture of everything. I like the color in it, but I also kind of like the organization in it. I'm quite an untidy person when I take notes. So the previous one gets very untidy quite fast, and then it stops working for me.
Marcus said a similar thing in the chat. He says, and I think it was in reference to the first cluster rather than the second, that he finds highlighting relevant strands and connections very helpful. So I think, like both of us, that second example was much more organized. That first one was good kind of to brainstorm, but then taking it and reviewing it and reorganizing it is important.
So you could actually move from one to the other, couldn't you?
Robin, on the other hand, says that they're both too busy for her mind, and she likes plain lists, so something more structured and numbered with subheadings, possibly.
Like a flow chart.
Like a flow chart?
Yeah,
possibly.
Classify.
What do you think about this, Robin?
So yeah, this might work, and this works well for science concepts. The plant kingdom, and you have 2 types of cells and tissues, ones that are organized and ones that are not so highly organized. And then the similarities between the 2 of them and the differences. It all depends, and you only know really what works well for you when you are when you try these various different methods. Use of color and shape. So we've got color and a shape there. So that might work as well. And this is written by, without the use of colour, Tony Busan believes that our brain becomes bored and that it tunes out and goes to sleep. He believes that colour allows us to escape the dangers of monochrome monotony.
Kyle has posted a very interesting flowchart in the chat, so I recommend everyone have a look at it.
Yeah, I'll have a look. Okay. Yeah, it's quite spacious as well. So many of us do like colour though, but some of us like monochrome. So again, it's an individual thing. Really doesn't matter as long as you can remember it. So if you can remember it, can. A student said to me the other day, she was learning, I think she was repeating a unit, and she said, I'm finally getting it because she says it's hard. And I said, well, I spoke to a student who said that she learnt that unit and she ended up being she was helping students. It's called PASS tutors, and she learnt it by just drawing diagrams of the various parts of the body and their functions and everything, and then wiping it and then drawing it again, putting labels on, taking labels off, where you get a lot of information in a short space of time. And then the other students said, oh, I believe that I've heard about that, but I believe it takes a long time. And I thought, well, it's going to take a long time anyway. So, and that is the other thing, is that memory, to put a lot of information quickly into your brain over a short period of time, like 12 weeks. And, you have week 1 and then it's week 3 and every week's new and you've got another part of the body to deal with. You are going to have to put the time to that. So those science subjects will take, every effort, every minute that you might have out of your 12.5 hours. So the summary, what we've learned today is we've looked at assessment and practical tips. We've looked at how the brain works, and we've looked at some practical strategies to help with memory and learning. Now we have Learning Portfolio B, an understanding of in Module 8, and the questions are related to understanding of formative assessment, an example of how formative assessment has helped. Understanding of brain plasticity, and this is why we encouraged you, I forgot to tell you at the beginning, but I did tell you about third way through, to take some notes. So go back to those notes and look at how it could apply to your learning, not to Virginia's learning or my learning or your friend's learning, but to your learning. The principle of brain-based learning, how does it help you prepare for assessment? Give an example. So what principle might you use to help you prepare for something? And 3 strategies to help with memory. Have we got some questions? And remember that LPB is due in week 11. Friday.
No questions in the chat.
Oh.
I think
people are horribly confused, or otherwise they're really clear.
The people that I can see have been taking notes pretty effectively from what I could see. But I just want to make a comment. I think that 4th question for Learning Portfolio B in Module 8, I think those strategies have to come from the module. So, and I also would encourage people to think about strategies that they don't already use.
To extend your understanding of the whole concepts.
That's right. And look, people, another the problem that, sorry, I'll start this again. The mistake people make in answering C is that they focus on any kind of exam. Just remember that this, the strategy that you need to put in place is for an exam with heavy content. So flashcards might be a good idea, but just something like repeating, like rote learning, would not be a very useful strategy for a content heavy exam. You need to show some other kinds of more complex revision strategies.
I'm just going to open up Learning Portfolio B and look at the questions. I'll stop sharing that one.
So while you're doing that, Robin says, questions D, 3 memorizations strategies that we haven't already discussed. Does this include the ones we used in LPA? Did we talk about learning strategies in Learning Portfolio A? I can't, sorry, memorization strategies?
No, but we talked about learning styles, didn't we?
That's right. So no one's ever asked that before. Let's go with new ones, hey? That's the advice from here. So some of the strategies will be similar, that I mentioned in Module 8 will be similar to what was mentioned earlier. But if you look at that module, then you'll be fine. Has anyone read through the module and thought about a learning strategy that they might like to try? Robin goes on and says, so if you use writing notes, is that what you mean? Writing and rewriting the notes. I think reviewing your notes and organising them can be used again. Sure, that's a valid way to review and remember and embed your knowledge. Did I get that right, Robin? Have I understood you correctly?
Can people see, can you see the Learning Portfolio B? Lovely.
Yes, yep, and Module 8's just there. Well, it's beautiful. Thanks, Robin.
Okay, so what is your understanding of formative assessment? Give one example when formative assessment helped you learn something, either as a student or another area of your life. Just look at all aspects of the question. So 1, you've got to talk about formative assessment. 2, you've got to give an example when it helped you to learn something, either as a student or might be perhaps working in a cafe and operating a machine. These days, we know much more about the plasticity of the brain. Explain your understanding of this concept. So explain the concept of what it means and how it might apply to your learning. C, choose one principle of brain-based learning, not all 8 of them, and just one, and describe how this can assist you as you prepare for assessment. Now, if you're preparing for Learning Portfolio B, that's different, obviously, than maths or essay writing, which requires lots of reading. So how is it going to help you prepare for assessment? And give one specific example of how you have applied this to your learning, or how you might do so in the future. You don't have to have achieved it yet. You just have to think about, well, this might help me later on. Well, you might know that you have biology coming up in term 3. And you think, oh, chemistry, well, how are you going to cope? You have a content-heavy exam to prepare. So this is, as Virginia was saying, what you might do for one, you might not do for the other. So this is not going to probably be appropriate or as needed as much for an oral presentation. Describe 3 specific memorization strategies that you will use, drawing from the learning in the module. And they should be different than what you've discussed earlier. So that's 3. And strategies and drawing from your learning in this model. So how are they going to help you? Like content heavy, and you're going to have 3 strategies to get you there. And so that part that we looked at, the third part of today's lecture, should help you out, which your notes will.
So Lois, will we sign off for the online students, for the people who are going to watch the recording?
Yes, we could. So I will stop just as well. I've got you here, Virginia. I will stop recording. Are you sure I want to stop recording?